Hello, Archit Sahab. Um, we have traveled to Mysore. Then we went to Uttarakhand. Then we've been traveling a lot. It seems like. Are you done with wanderlusting, or you want to travel more? Explore more.
Never done with it. And I'm wondering if we can, get out of India. Even though we're an Indian food podcast, Indian food is everywhere. So why not get out of India today?
There was a very old movie, Archit, Mughal-e-Azam. There's a dialogue in that movie that aptly fit here. Kaniz ki arzu badhti ja rahi hai. Kaniz is, I think, it means peasant. Arzu is wishes. So clearly, your wishes, you have too many demands and too many wishes.
It's nothing to do with my knees.
No, okay. Sorry, nothing to do with your niece or nephews.
Okay, so where are we going today?
Today we will go to a fantastic, beautiful place where I have been once. That's about it. We will go to, actually, let's mix together. We will go to Bangladesh and we will go to London.
Wait a second. Bangladesh is on one side, London is on one side. What is this?
Yeah, I have got this amazing diplomat passport. I can travel anywhere, basically. But both the places we will cover because we've got Dina Begum. Hi, Dina.
Hello. Hi, Sadaf. Hi, Archit.
Really glad to have you on the show today, Dina.
Thank you for having me.
Today, she will make us travel to Bangladesh and to London. Dina is a cookbook author, a writer who's passionate about highlighting the recipes and food traditions of Bangladesh. Dina is also a member of the Guild of Food Writers and has written a feature and recipes series for Great British Chefs based on the 6 seasons of Bangladeshi cuisine. And itna hi nahi, bhai sahab, filmed a spice blends tutorial series for Yodomo. So in Hindi, you call it Sarvgun Sampann. One person with so many different qualities. So we are going to travel in the lanes and the bylanes of both Bangladesh and London together. Well, almost together. So Dina, right up very first question. And as I said, I have been to Bangladesh just once in my life ever. This was a little while back. And the joke was, I'm not kidding. This is a real thing. When I was starting at the immigration office in Dhaka, the guy asked me there, the immigration officer, he asked me, why are you in Bangladesh? Okay, just to set context, we became little pally a little while back before this incident happened. Pally as in just chit-chat and making fun of each other. I don't know why we were making fun of each other. This was I would say, the most coolest immigration officer I have ever met. Okay. Usually immigration officers are not cool. They will stare you down. They will stare you to death. Anywho, so he looked at me and he asked, why are you in Bangladesh? And I said, because, it's very difficult to get Pakistan visa.
Oh, we did.
And he started laughing. He was like, oh, that's why you're in Bangladesh. Yeah, that's why I'm in Bangladesh. Then he says, have you ever been to Bangladesh before? I said, no, I have never been to Bangladesh. He said, have you ever been to Dhaka before? I said, if I have not been to Bangladesh, of course, I have not been to Dhaka as well. It's a simple calculation. And then he says, yeah, that is true. But just be careful. There is mad traffic on the streets. Then I told him, have you ever been to Bangalore in India? He said, no. I said, oh, then you won't understand. Because Bangalore also has mad traffic. So that's how we became pally. And so that's random banter, which really happened to me. At times, I think my life is a joke. All these jokes happen to me all the time. Anyway, so the question was that, when I went there, but I tasted the food in Bangladesh. But for somebody who's never been to Bangladesh, who's only heard about Bangladesh, who has seen where it exists on map and has seen news and shows, etc., knows about Bangladesh. But if you have to explain, how would you explain Bangladeshi food to people who are completely ignorant?
I would say it's mostly highlighting rice and fish, but there's a lot of vegetarian and vegan food. We don't tend to use a lot of dairy in our foods generally. So if it's mainly oil, it's got with oil, plain oil or mustard oil. So in terms of the main difference, I would say the rice, the fish, the vegetables, and obviously the sweets, which are a big part. So that would be my kind of and it's very varied, even across Bangladesh. And we spoke earlier, and I was saying that it changes from north to south drastically. So because of the geographical location. So yeah, I mean, I would say it's even if you want to, put in a sentence, it's rice, fish, and vegetables with a dose of sweet. So that's what I would say essentially.
When you're saying rice, fish, and vegetables, what would that be?
Yeah, so seasonal, any kind of gourds, you have gourds, you have, the regular kind of more common, peppers, carrots, potatoes, aubergines, all those kind of things. But there's a lot of leafy greens like sharks or sag, I guess. And so tubers, leafy greens, so anything that can be made into a kind of a spinachy shark kind of dish is, shredded very finely and made, mustard leaves, which obviously is across the board as well. The leaves of bottle gourd, so we have that, in a kind of a stew as well as a vegetable dish. Lal shag, which is, purple spinach. So anything kind of spinachy, kind of sauteed dishes, which is very popular, as well as kind of a lot of vegetables, in particular with fish. So whether it's pumpkin with seafood, which is a popular dish, lao chinkli. You have kind of a lot of beans and most parts of the vegetables are used. So you have bottle gourd, use the inside flesh, but you also use the peel, which you use in kind of a dry fish curry, for instance, called, shutki, which is dry or fermented fish. So that's quite popular to have it like that as well. So I guess it's kind of almost zero waste policy. I was talking about recently, saying that you use practically every part of the vegetable they use or the fish. You have, fish head curry, for instance, which is like a stew and it tends to be quite light, but also cook fish head with bottle gourd, which is a classic dish as well. So I guess whatever seasonal and local, so it varies from region to region, and there's so much to learn. I'm learning as I go. Even kind of in my work and my research, but the areas I'm familiar with, Sylhet, Dhaka mostly, some Chittagong because we've got family friends in there. So those are the 3 regions out of the 8 that I'm most familiar with in all the southern divisions. So, but then there's tons of things. Rajshahi, for instance, northwest, they produce a lot of the vegetables in Bangladesh. So a lot of that trickles down, south, west, south, or eastward. So yeah, I mean it's very seasonal, which is why I talk about the 6 seasons of Bangladesh. So whichever produce is in season, that becomes kind of the highlight of that season. And it's known as a country of 13 festivals in 12 months, which kind of is indicative of how many festivals and how many things are celebrated. So you pack a lot of celebrations like rain festival, spring festival, Boishaki, which you may know of, which is the main holiday in summer. So yeah, everything's kind of dependent on local and seasonal produce, or it used to be. I mean, it changed a lot, because of obviously development, etc. But I'd say, yeah, I mean, just whatever's around and a lot of seafood. And so things are paired, according to what's available. So if you're having kind of smaller fish one season, you might choose more kind of leafy greens and light vegetables. Or if you're using kind of bigger fish, then you use more kind of root vegetables or gourds, things like that. So don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, that's kind of roughly a broad overview.
That's very interesting. So our audience for our podcast is primarily in India, even though we have listeners in Africa, the
UAE,
Middle East, and and Europe as well. So just for our listeners, how is Bangladeshi cuisine or East Bengal cuisine different from West Bengal cuisine? How much in percentage, how much is there an overlap and how much is there a difference?
Overlap, I would say there's definitely an overlap. I mean, I can't say in terms of percentage, but I'd say definitely about 25%, 25 maybe more. And although there's a lot of overlap in terms of dishes, but the way they're cooked and subtle kind of flavor differences are still different. So you might have the same kind of dal dish or kind of sweet dish, but it was cooked slightly differently. or in West Bengal, there's slight sweetness to dishes and less heat. And across the border, in Bangladesh, you have, obviously depends on the regions. Some regions have very kind of fiery, spicy food, which doesn't seem to be a thing in West Bengal. So I'd say that's one of the major differences. There's a lot of, due to religion or tradition, cultural kind of habits. There's sometimes, garlic or, ginger or onions are not used and substituted by spices like Naja or whatever. So, in some places in Bangladesh as well, obviously because of the history. But yeah, I'd say there's about probably 25%, maybe more. I mean, it could be wrong. I haven't been to recently, so that's a foodie trip to look forward to. But slight overlap. But I think in perhaps the north side of it more. But the further you go down south, there's huge differences. So even I'm surprised to learn there's a lot of when I was researching my previous book as well as my work generally, there's a lot of influences from Southeast Asia because we're bordering Myanmar. So and from that you have a lot of influences. You have sourness. You have a lot of coconut-based dishes. Further south, whereas in the northern kind of areas, east west, it's you use coconut more for sweet. Whereas the further south you go, you might be in a curry or a stew. You might be in a fish dish. So it's a bit kind of reminiscent of, I would say, kind of maybe South Indian or Sri Lankan cuisine in some ways, but also you've got the kind of Southeast Asian influence like Thai, a little bit of Thai, Burmese influence as well. So you have those fermented foods and the tamarind, other kind of sour ingredients used in food. So it is and soups and broths and things like that. A lot of steamed food. So it changes a lot. So I say West Bengal and Bangladesh probably have more similarities, across the border, but then it changes more and more as you kind of travel down south or to other regions. But even when I speak to friends from West Bengal, which I'm learning, funnily enough, it's only through my food kind of career over the last several years, when I've kind of got into it full time, that I've made more friends from West Bengal. So before, it was it's funny because you do research and you meet people, you go to kind of food events, you're introduced to people, and you find out more about these differences. And I know friends who are from West Bengal but who've worked in Dhaka, for instance, or other parts of Bangladesh in Chittagong, and they'll say, it's totally different in some ways. And like we were saying earlier, when you look at something, whether it's Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi food, it might look very similar even to us, people from South Asia. But when we eat it, like we're constantly amazed. My mum's always saying, what is in this? For instance, the Pakistani, we've got Pakistani family friends, and they sometimes send us food, and we send them food, and it's just something that happens all the time, as you probably know. So it's when we say, what is this in this spice then? It's really different, and they say the same thing about our food. And so you might see this is a biryani, or this is a kind of a sweet dish, but it's cooked in a different way, or you have a subtle spice. Your one spice can change everything. We use a lot of bay leaf in our sweet dishes in Bangladesh, which isn't very popular, across the board. So West Bengal, they use that as well. So it's like we try and brew it of sweet spicing, cardamom, cinnamon, and bay leaf, which is quite popular used together in Bengali or Bangladesh in particular. And sometimes I think I spoke to your friend from Punjab, and she was saying to me that, you use bay leaf in your halwa, for instance, and I was surprised that they didn't. But it's these kind of subtle differences that can completely change a flavor profile of a dish. And I think, it's quite subtle in terms of when you go into it, but overall, there's some similarities in names, similarities in the way things look. Obviously, actual similarities, there is a lot of that as well. But but in terms of overall, I'd say there's definitely lots of differences, more than similarities.
So broadly, when subtle differences, and yet there are similarities between almost all the dishes, be it
Absolutely.
name or something.
So that's very interesting. I also want to know how much is red meat used in Bangladeshi food, for example, beef or lamb. I mean, it's primarily a seafood eating country, but how much is there a use of beef or lamb?
I'd say it's equally popular, if not more, in some regions. And increasing the development, I'd say it's another thing where people are, it's always been a thing. If you're living in the rural areas, obviously you have your own kind of fish in the kind of the local kind of waters, and as well as your own kind of cattle or farm, whatever. So you do have access to that, and in terms of red meat, beef is quite popular, as well as mutton. I'd say the beef is kind of the most popular red meat in terms of the kind of classic dishes, and in kind of the West or UK, for instance, it depends on the family, of course, but people tend to have more meat, chicken, and probably less seafood. I've seen that's kind of a trend, especially among younger people who aren't cooking the traditional fish as much as their parents or grandparents. So definitely things are changing in terms of how people are eating generally. But in Bangladesh as well, I think with I come from a rural, kind of semi-rural area, so like it's not so much anymore, but the town is growing at a very kind of rapid rate, and it's become quite kind of modern or developed, I guess, Western in terms of the food as well. So it's a lot more kind of burgers and pizzas alongside the traditional food. So that has an impact also on what people are eating kind of daily. So they might, choose more kind of Western inspired food, or which is quite sad. I mean, I feel like it's kind of taking over everything, but things are like that. It's more convenient with people's schedules as well. People are working, they're going to offices, and they're having more kind of official jobs as well, as opposed to working kind of more locally. So they'll probably have a lot more travel time. So people do want convenience as well, which is fine. But that does take away from making those traditional dishes, which do take, it's the labor of love. So they do take time. They do take, the preparation takes most of the time. It's not the cooking preparation. So that's I would say I mean, in a nutshell, red meat is it's quite popular. I mean, again, beef being the main one, whether it's the north or south, I'd say beef is probably the most popular one.
So that reminds me of a so I love biryani. Actually, we both love biryani.
Everyone loves biryani. I love biryani too. So
Everybody loves biryani.
Everyone loves,
Where we both sort of argue and fight is the addition of potato in biryani.
Okay.
I am the one who loves potato in biryani. He doesn't. Are you in team potato in the biryani, or you not?
I think it depends on the biryani. Some biryanis, I feel like you have to have potatoes. Some biryanis, I'm like, no, for instance, if it's a lamb, beef or mutton biryani, then I would, for instance, a kachi biryani, Bangladeshi style, it needs potatoes. So I would say potatoes have to be there. But whereas if I have more of a kind of North Indian biryani, then I don't put potatoes in there. It'll be kind of just, you'd have, mint, coriander, and fried onions, tomatoes, and I don't like potatoes in there. And probably like most Bengalis love potatoes. I generally love potatoes. But in biryani, I think it depends on the biryani. Some I prefer not to, just because I feel like chicken flavor is quite delicate as opposed to red meat, and it doesn't need it, and that's my personal preference anyway. So depends.
It's been a year since Sadaf and I have been fighting over this, and I think you finally sort of you finally got us to a middle ground where we can both live with this answer. So thank you for that.
It's like it doesn't matter.
Potato wars.
And for listeners, our last episode was on potatoes, so do check that out as well.
Yeah. So the thing that I want to ask as a follow-up on the biryani itself, because now does it matter or not? Does it matter? I mean, what meat is more sort of used is in biryani? Is it beef? Is it mutton, lamb, chicken, fish? So that's the first. And or does it also sort of depends on which region of Bangladesh you're coming from?
I'd say regional kind of differences probably come into it more. I don't know. I mean, I guess from where we are, my family's from in Sylhet. It's kind of next to, well, it's neighbouring couple of places, but it's close to Dhaka in some ways, and there's a lot of connection that way. So you have a lot of that kind of Mughal-inspired Dhaka kind of food, which is Dhaka is known for. You have that kind of trickle down to Sylhet as well. So it does seem to be kind of, a beef, mutton, but then there's also chicken. So I think, what I can go by is probably growing up, if in terms of the biryani, it was generally happened to be red meat. But if it's a pulao, for instance, then it'd be chicken. Occasionally there's a seafood, you have like ilish pulao, which is, obviously the famous fish of Bangladesh. So you have that, but that's the kind of occasional thing. Seafood, pulao made with prawns and things, that's occasional as well. So, but yeah, I mean, biryani tends to be generally with red meat, I would say. But again, I think it's also family preferences, because I mean, I feel like in a country, I mean, especially now, like Bangladesh, people are moving around a lot more. So people are traveling for work, traveling different, living in different places. They're traveling abroad. There's a lot of kind of, people settling in the West, and then they go back to Bangladesh for visits, and that kind of trickles through in terms of not just people coming and going, but also the kind of financial assistance. And I think that helps kind of in some areas. The money is a booster and it helps develop the kind of the local economy, and that's been a major influence, I would say, in terms of food as well, food development, because you're getting kind of more, I guess, restaurants, malls and things like that, and that has a trickle down effect on the kind of local areas, even rural areas. And again, with social media, people are cooking different things. People want to try everything. My sister-in-law's from Bangladesh, so she married my brother and came over here. It's been here a few years, but I feel from her, if I look at it from her point of view, she's kind of looking at it, whereas I'm kind of, I'm like the Bengali grandma here, so I'm just kind of going back to the classic and traditional, because that's what I do. That's my kind of passion, to preserve those things. And also because, I write about food, that's kind of my area. But for her, it's, she's been there, done that. She's lived and grown up in Bangladesh, so it's not that kind of new. But she's more interested in trying kind of, I guess, more Western dishes, Indian, Pakistani dishes, and which, I do as well. But it's something that it's that kind of, I guess, globalization kind of perspective, I would say, because you're kind of, there's everything kind of available. If you've got a smartphone, if you've got a laptop, if you've got a TV, you're getting all these kind of influences. So it's kind of, I guess, how I can explain it would be is if someone like my sister-in-law or my cousins, bored, they might kind of look at things and it's kind of going outwards, and looking at different things. But for me, it's kind of coming back to kind of the roots of my cuisine and heritage. So it's kind of opposite ends. And then sometimes you meet in the middle, but then sometimes I'm kind of recreating things that, even my parents haven't had in so many years. And they're like, oh, you're making this is just such an old dish, or they've forgotten the name of sometimes, and which is nice in a way, because then they're like, oh, I had this like 20 years ago and this tastes almost the same. And I'm like, then I'm pleased, because sometimes I haven't had those dishes myself. So it's through research and through just speaking to my grandma, or just trying to remember what I used to have when I was a kid. And I've only, sadly been back to Bangladesh once, and I pretty much grew up here. I came when I was 4, and then I went back once, and I was planning going back. I was saying to Sadaf the last time we spoke a couple of years ago, but obviously, coronavirus happened. But it's, I can't remember. Do you see what I mean? I'm just kind of going off on my own kind of food journey. So I'm so obsessed with talking about food. But yeah, it's, I guess, going back to, the biryanis, it's, it depends on the region. But I think, definitely, I mean, in my family and, my extended family, everyone loves a red meat biryani. I'd say that's their personal preference. But for me, I don't eat a huge amount of red meat. So personally, I like, chicken equally, if not more. But then, for me, it has to be kind of a special dish for me to have red meat. I wouldn't kind of naturally go to it, like, go to a restaurant and say I'll have, all the lamb chops and all the grills, which most of my family and friends do, because they want kind of the red meat, even in kind of family occasions, whereas I prefer kind of, I guess, more chicken and vegetables. That's my personal preference. And occasionally I'd have something, that's red meat if it's a special dish.
Yeah.
Lovely. And speaking of social media, you mentioned social media. I would like our listeners to go check out Dina on Instagram. She's at Dina's Food Stories. And while you do that, we will take a tiny break.
All right, people. I'm sure people have already done their social research, stalking or following, whatever words you fancy. Let's come back from the break we're not done yet. A couple of more interesting conversations. And a quick thing on that, Dina, that I've heard Bangladeshi food, and you've also written about it, that Bangladeshi food is traditionally eaten in courses. There are different kind of course while you're having the food. So what are those courses?
So, I mean, I wondered about it. So even though I guess when you're growing up, you don't really think about, how you're eating your food, it's just how you're taught to eat. So you start off with, in terms of courses, we start off with, a vegetarian dish or a vegetarian, like you can have a saute or something or a bhaji, and then you have fish, so fried fish. So you have a fried fish or boltas, which I talk about. So, like mashed salt, you have, buffet, I guess. But so like Bangladeshi boltas is like tons of them, there's hundreds of boltas. And so you start with vegetarian, fried fish, boltas, and those are, those can kind of mix and match, but then you kind of go on to fish, like a fish stew or fish curry, and then you go on to chicken or meat, and you end with something sweet. Not always, but often with something sweet. So in terms of putting something on your plate, you wouldn't necessarily, would never mix fish and meat on our plate. Even to this day, even if I go somewhere and then you have to have a few things on your plate, I wouldn't eat it together. I'd eat one thing at a time. But it's like my pet hate when people put, too many things on their plate. The only time you can kind of mix things would be if you're having vegetables with fish, or vegetables with something, or dal with meat or chicken, but not dal with fish, unless you're making kind of a particular, famous Bangladeshi dish. Do you see what I mean? Like, I've forgotten the name of it. So a fish head curry, you put dal in it. So it's quite well known. And so these are the ways, it's literally you would eat course by course, and then, I've got a habit of even just changing my plate when I go from fish to meat, because you don't want the flavors to kind of mix, and that kind of, it's kind of from light flavors to heavier flavors. But obviously that depends on what you're eating. Sometimes you're just eating one thing, but often in our household or the kind of Bangladeshi household, there's usually a fish dish, as well as meat and vegetables, kind of like a trio of things usually. In our family, everybody's like a foodie, and my dad's like planning the menu for the next week, while he's having dinner. So let's cook tomorrow. We'll have this and we'll have that. So he kind of guides the main cooking of the house, and he grows a lot of the vegetables because we have an allotment, a community garden.
Oh wow!
So as well as kind of our garden where he grows little few things, but I try and keep him away from that, because then it turns into a vegetable patch. I'm like, okay, you can grow some herbs on this side, but not everything else. But yeah, so the allotment plot, he grows pretty much everything, and so lucky that we have majority of our vegetables from what Dad grows. And he grows, so you have potatoes. He's growing potatoes, gourds, pumpkin, beans, different kind of beans, Bangladeshi beans, as well as Western beans, banana beans, things like that. You have fruits. So I mean, even in our garden, I guess. When I talk about it, because I take it for granted, we take it for granted because that's how I've grown up for the last 15 years, maybe more than that. With that Dad's grown a lot of stuff, and there's a boom. Just kind of going off that tangent, but in growing produce in the UK by Bangladeshis in particular, and also to other South Asians, because people are trying to grow the vegetables that they wouldn't necessarily get easily in the UK that they have from the homeland. Now it's a bit more easier because you have obviously the grocery stores, but not everybody can access those kind of grocery stores. So, and obviously growing fresh is totally different to buying it from the stores, even if it comes, on a flight 2 days earlier. And obviously it's much better for the planet if you can grow your own as well. And it's something that, a lot of people are doing. So things that you wouldn't necessarily have, or it'll be seasonal, now you can grow if you have an allotment and if you have, plan everything. Gardening in this country, I'm not a gardener, but my dad saying you have to really be dedicated, because if you miss that, 1 week window where you're supposed to plant the seeds or whatever it is, the different kind of elements, then you won't have any kind of crop. And last couple of years been tough, obviously. the weather is very unpredictable, as you know, so we don't get a lot of sun. So you've got to plan everything around that kind of literally few weeks of sunshine that you get, sporadically over summer. But yeah, I mean, it's just how we're talking about courses. So yeah, that's kind of how it is, I guess. And I'm just like really shocked when I see, especially like Indian friends or other friends, they're like English friends who sometimes they're used to eating Indian food where it's normal to eat things on your plate, similar things, or a thali or something, that kind of style where you can put a few things on your plate, several things. I'm like, no, I don't need that. So I'm kind of training my friend Victoria, actually one of my good friends who's English, and she loves South Asian cuisine, and she's the only person, and I thought she was kind of half South Asian or something, but she's actually fully English. But she loves kind of South Asian food. She cooks it sometimes too, and but teaching her the differences between Indian and Pakistani food that she's used to Bangladeshi food, which she hadn't really tried before, and just how the different ways of eating. So I'm finally, I'm proud to say I've taught her how to eat with her hands, so she can eat with her hands, just as well as anybody else now, and she actually prefers to, which is quite funny. So even if I'm sometimes occasionally grabbing a spoon or a fork, she'll be like, let's just eat with her hands. So
she's another convert, basically.
Yes.
So
lovely. I personally can't fathom eating South Asian food with like fork or knife. Sometimes, with say dal and rice could be an exception, but otherwise, it completely changes the eating experience if you use cutlery. See, interestingly, you mentioned Bangladeshi food in London being distinct from Indian and other subcontinent food like Pakistani food. So I'm very interested about that. So when, of course, there's huge diaspora of people from subcontinent in London and the UK largely. So when food from here, the Indian subcontinent, travel to the UK, did it get consolidated as like Indian subcontinent food, or were different regions like Bangladeshi, South Indian, North Indian, Pakistani, were these regions able to maintain their unique identity amongst all the South Asian foods?
I think mainly no. I would say now there is a change slowly happening, but the major shift, I would say, from what I can see, South Indian or and Sri Lankan food, it's always had its place. Like certain areas in London, for instance, you go to East Ham, which is a South Indian / Sri Lankan area where you have a lot of dosa places, Kerala food, Sri Lankan food. So that had its own kind of unique identity in some parts of South London as well. So that's been quite distinct. But in terms of, and even kind of, I guess, you have little pockets of like Gujarati food in some areas, or Punjabi food, which for me as a Londoner, I've always kind of noticed, because you have kind of areas like Southall in West London where it's a high population of Punjabis or Indians, and you go and it's instantly different, and you can see, and but and again, you go to kind of other parts of London where you see distinctly it's quite different. You have dosas being made, and all kinds of Indian kind of food. But generally, on the whole, what was known as Indian food it is changing now. Probably for the last decade, I'd say there's more of a kind of a shift. But originally, a majority of people who came over to the UK to cook kind of what was known as Indian food were Bangladeshis, funny enough. But this is or Bengalis that time before Bangladesh, was obviously Bangladesh, and or Indians, even Pakistan was there. So they'd come on the ships in what used to be kind of, British Raj era, which most people would like to forget. So, but it's, they'd come over here as seamen or lascars, as they used to be called, and they'd settle around ports and cook for their countrymen, as well as kind of any locals who wants to eat the food. And generally speaking, even traditionally, even now to some degree, men used to be cooking in the household. So it used to be kind of, the woman cooking. So it'd be kind of a new way of cooking. It wouldn't be, somebody kind of trained in their mother's kitchen 100 years ago and they'd come and cook. But they'd cook some of the flavors that they recreated that they remember. So already it was a different kind of cuisine from what was in their kitchens. And then when restaurants started opening up opening up predominantly in the kind of 60s, 70s, like, 70s especially, huge boom. And there used to be on Brick Lane more than 50 restaurants. And now there's only around 10, which is quite sad. And the whole area is kind of being completely like redeveloped and is shifting. There's a lot of things going on. And that's like the large Bangladesh community. And that's known for being Bangla Town, where all the curry houses, which is another term in the West that we use, which can be just anything. And in my life, I mean, I guess it's being South Asian, you don't tend to eat out as much South Asian food when you go and eat out. I don't know about India or Bangladesh, but in the West, in the UK, you don't as much because, first of all, it's nothing like home cooked food, and secondly, they want very many options. And the couple of times I made the mistake of doing that, when I was in, at university and school, I thought, oh my God, what is this? And some of these dishes were completely made up, or they're hybrid dishes, chicken tikka masalas, things like, I don't know, to this date, I don't know what, patia and all these kind of dishes are, there's a dish called bal or something, and it's really hot. And it's like looking, I mean, my family, some of my uncles have had and still do have restaurants, and it's the typical, what you've known as curry house restaurant. And you're looking at that menu, I'm just like, I don't recognize any of this apart from the samosa, maybe, and biryani, and all of this stuff are just random things. And it's now I say it's a sub cuisine, so I wouldn't, most of it is made up, some of it's kind of semi-authentic, and I don't think it's either Indian food or Bangladeshi food. It's run, most of the restaurants are run and owned by Bangladeshis, but the food doesn't reflect their culture, primarily because when they started, these restaurants decades ago, more than 100 years ago sometimes, I think their first restaurant known kind of Bangladeshi or Indian eatery was probably about a couple of 100 years ago, and it was like a cafe by Sheikh Mohammed, this guy who opened a cafe, and he was quite well to do, and he came over to the UK and he married an English lady, and they opened a nice little restaurant cafe where they had curries in those days, but it was nothing like, obviously it was kind of Western, very much Western with a few spices in there, but that kind of started off the interest in curry or South Asian food in the UK. But yeah, I mean, Indian food, it's not, I mean, everything was known as Indian food. I guess if you were Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian, it was known as Indian food generally on the whole, because, and from the Western point of view, people would call it, I mean, I remember 20 years ago, or when I was in school, like even further back, that people would say, oh, we're having an Indian, or we're getting a curry. And I'm like, what is that? And then when you're curious, you order, and then just out of curiosity, I ordered a few of these things. I remember like years ago, and I'm like, I literally took something, ordered something, then I had to put my own kind of spices in it. I had to recook it in order to make it edible. And I thought, I don't want to waste it, but this is not, I mean, it's not really cooked properly. So I literally cooked it again in order to eat it. And I'm like, I couldn't. And, but now I find that there is a shift in terms of, in one way it's good, but I hope it is kind of trickled down to Bangladeshi cuisine as well, that a lot of the Indian restaurants, you have, for instance, Cinnamon Kitchen, which is more the kind of Western twist to it, but it's in the Old British Library, and Chef Vivek Singh, I don't know, you must have heard of Vivek Singh, so he was one of the founders and still is, and then there's that kind of Indian food, or kind of slightly fusion kind of food, and he's a chef, so he's like traditionally trained in lots of areas, so he's doing his own kind of twist to Indian food, which is very nice. But in terms of, like, there's Darjeeling Express, which you must have heard of, and there's other restaurants. There's Veera Swami. I don't know if it's still open. It was closed for a bit, but that's still mostly very vegetarian. And there's all these kind of restaurants, Benares, with Atul Kochar, who owns it, and so these are kind of Indian cuisine specific, and they are very much focused on highlighting Indian food, so people do go there and they'll find something that's quite authentic, but that helps. So I feel like the setup for the kind of Indian cuisines was set like aged for decades and more than 100 years ago, but now it's kind of allowed kind of Indian cuisine to shine and gain a place. So people who used to call Indian food everything Indian food now know that this is Indian food, so they're more specific to this Indian food. But whereas Bangladeshi food and Pakistani food, they still have a long way to go in terms of coming out and almost breaking out. And it's quite sad because majority of Bangladeshis were the pioneers of what is known as Indian food, on how these kind of dishes came to the country, or the love of spices, I guess. But then the cuisine itself is not very visible in terms other than cafes and eateries. So you wouldn't say, oh, let's go to that restaurant, or somebody off the top of their head would know somewhere like in central London you'd find a nice establishment, focusing on Bangladeshi food. There's not that there at the moment. But hopefully soon, and I think there are like some small eateries, and people are just generally, I think, again, social media, cookbooks, TV chefs, all sorts of things, that there's a surge in people's interest in kind of food, not just in the UK but globally, because people are interested in different cuisines and regional food. So everyone, wants to, my English friends, this is Gujarati or this is Punjabi, or they're quite, kind of proud to identify these things. And I'm like, oh, that's really nice to know, because it's not, they're kind of looking at these kind of different elements of food, and they're not thinking that this is just Indian food or this is Bangladeshi, or so there's that shift, and I think Indian food has kind of made its place. Recently, I feel like there's a lot more kind of buzz going around Indian food, and people to know what it is, or they're learning more about it. But with Pakistani food and Bangladeshi food, I feel like it hasn't got to that point where you have those kind of nicer establishments, for instance, in the city, fine dining restaurants, or not, it doesn't have to be fine dining. I'm not like a huge fan of fine dining, but it's about the food. So like I guess, well-placed or more visible restaurant, in terms of people knowing, hold on a second, we'll go to that Bangladesh restaurant. We're coming to London, or we're in the city, so this is the go-to place. So I feel like in that sense, these Pakistani and Bangladeshi cuisines have to kind of gain more visibility. But Indian food, I think it's kind of already there, or getting there.
Awesome. Yes, I think what you mentioned towards the end as well, which is because so many people, because of globalization or because of social media or whatever it may be, people have started cooking a lot more. If not cooking, exploring food for sure from different regions. It's Indian food. Tomorrow, who knows? It will be Bangladeshi and Pakistani. Or I'm hopeful that as a subcontinent, we'll just put ourselves out there saying this is Indian subcontinent food. And that also brings me to before we get to our last segment, which is the under and overrated food, according to you, I also wanted to ask you one thing, which was also from one of your articles where you wrote about the women being the future of food, right? And for listeners, we will put in the show note. You can click on that link and go and read the article. Now, the question I want to ask you, because you mentioned about how you learned cooking from your mother, and your mother learned cooking from her mother. So basically, grandmother, mother, and you, which is not a new thing, so to speak. It is what happens in general across the globe, I believe, or at least in our part of the world. But where I'm coming at is it's also a very cultural thing, I believe, because that's also something which I'm interested in, to know the culture part of it. That is it in the modern times, are people, when I'm saying people, I mean women, are women still interested in cooking as much as maybe they were made interested? And the reason I'm saying they were made interested, because I think back in days, a couple of years back, and even now as well, women in general are asked to learn food cooking skill so that they can become marriage ready, marriage material, basically. But in the modern times, are women in Bangladesh still doing that? Is it a forced thing to do, or is it something just out of passion and love?
I can't speak for majority of Bangladeshis in Bangladesh, but but again, seeing cousins and people over there. But also, funny thing is, you say about people learning, being kind of encouraged to cook, as it were, in preparation for marriage. That still exists in Bangladesh. Places like a lot of South Asian places. If you're kind of, if you're fortunate enough to have help around the house, for instance, a cook or somebody, then traditionally, like in our, where it's, if you're average middle class family, especially in rural areas, you tend to have, I don't know, in kind of urban areas as well. If you have a cook, you know, like in a family that had a cook, and so the ladies of the house, they would in Bangladesh help. They would cook the dishes. They would supervise, usually cook, but then there'd also be help in terms of preparation and things like that. So there's always somebody else, you know, handy. But and for my mother growing up, she said she didn't cook anything when she didn't go into the kitchen when she was growing up until she got married, and then she kind of started learning to cook. And then, you know, that was she's also passionate about cooking, but it wasn't like my sister-in-law, for instance, who came over here through marriage. She didn't cook much at all when she was in Bangladesh. It's only when she came over here. And it's different here, like, you know, people don't tend to have, you know, a cook in the house, you know, unless you're very wealthy in the West. So, and it's just not the norm, I guess. Even if you could afford one, you know, people just do, it's much more than an independent, self-sustaining household, you know, setup where we are. And so I think it's definitely that encouragement, you know, get ready for marriage, get ready to, like, it's not so much. Whereas I find the major thing is if men, a lot of like cousins, you know, male cousins who've gone off to university or gone to live in a hostel or something abroad, or even at university over here, they're taught to you know, cook the basics just to kind of get by. But it's not the kind of thing that, you know, you have to cook because you're going to cook for your future wife. There's none of that. So there is that kind of gender division, definitely. And it still exists when people, I mean, I still hear things people say, how are you going to like cook for your in-laws, how are you going to cook for your husband, and how you should learn this, you should learn that, and what your in-laws going to say. And I'm just like, oh my God, that's just ridiculous, because everyone should learn to, in my opinion, everyone should learn to cook, whether you're a man or a woman, just to kind of fend for yourself. And it's so there's cultural kind of norms, you know, they are slowly shifting, and I feel like the major shift has been not just amongst people, the newer younger generations, or people kind of, you know, like even my younger siblings, for instance, you know, one of my sisters loves to, actually two of them love to cook, one of them doesn't. I don't think she knows how to boil an egg or food, so she's like, I'm not, you know, and she'd sneak away at every opportunity. But then there's obviously us cooking, so there is that, you know, focus, I guess. Sometimes it seems the only way you're let off cooking as a woman, or when I was growing up anyway, is if you're studying. So if you're studying, you're busy with the books, or you visit work, then it's okay. But if you're hanging around the house, you've not much to do, or if it's your holidays, those are the days you have to learn to cook. And the whole message is, yes, for marriage, for your in-laws, for your future children, you know. Sometimes you may not even have these, but you know, that's the whole kind of premise of it, and that's still prevalent now, you know. So whether you're cooking at all or not, you know, you're thrown into crash course before marriage. You've got to learn. I remember my cousin didn't cook at all, and over here in the UK, and then suddenly she had this crash course, and I remember seeing her cooking. It's quite sad actually, but funny at the same time, because she was used to, you know, being like a very what's the word, studious person, you know, into her book, into her career profession, and she trained in pharmacy, and so she's kind of used to the lab and that, and then suddenly she's in the kitchen trying to kind of measure things out and look at things, and I'm like, well, I can understand because I love cooking and I've always cooked, but so it's kind of, that expectation is still there, but saying that, the parents' expectations are slowly shifting as well, because they realize it's not just, you know, the way people live, it's changing rapidly, whether it's in the West or whether abroad as well. I mean, obviously rural areas still pretty much the same. I don't think that's changed that much. Just, you know, speaking and seeing cousins abroad, but here in particular, I think more men are being interested in cooking. They are, whereas before, I've got one brother and there's 4 of us sisters, so he was not allowed near the kitchen. I mean, it's literally, it's not even funny. It's like, why does he get special treatment? And he does, and boys do, you know, tend to, what they used to. And so now, you know, it's kind of encouraging people to kind of do stuff themselves. And now, I think the only reason he's cooking now for himself a little bit more is because he's going to the gym and he needs a high protein kind of food. So he's in charge of that. But that's for a specific goal, right? So it's not because, oh, I'm going to love cooking, I'm just suddenly going to cook up curry for my sisters and my mum. That's not, you know, rare. And, you know, he actually briefly worked at a restaurant, you know, so I think it's that thing where if you work at a restaurant, it's your job. So you can be a chef or you can, you know, be part of the staff, but not in the house kind of thing. And that's still kind of prevalent now, unless you have a natural inclination towards cooking. But, you know, those kind of stereotypes are slowly breaking because more women are going out to work. So it's not just, women staying at home and men going to work. So that's kind of allowed a little bit of a gender balance, but I think it's still a long way to go, even in the UK, in the West, because, there's still that expectation, even if it's not from your partner, it's going to be the expectation from your in-laws, from your parents, and I know a lot of like female friends, relatives, it's that, a lot of the time it's that, I would say like the female influence of, being a good wife for someone and, being prepared. And I'm like, I don't know, it's like preparing for an exam. It's just, but that's another conversation before I go off on my, like, what is this nonsense? Often I'd say, what is this nonsense? Like, a man is not going to die if he goes into the kitchen and chops a few onions, and he cooks, because that's just kind of the normal thing. And it's I think generally it's a life skill. It's a life skill that if you know how to cross the road without getting run over. If you're by yourself, you know how to cook. You don't have to become top chef, but just kind of the basics. And even if you're in a couple, I think people don't factor in things like so even if you did have a traditional partner, a wife who was doing all the household chores, cooking, but what happens if she's not well, or what happens if she's not around? What happens if she goes on holiday or gets a job somewhere else? Who's going to do the cooking? So takeaway is not a sustainable way of living. And so I feel like there's definitely in the West I can see a shift, but not so much abroad. But depends again on where you're from. In the cities, yes, I think, but I think there's probably the media, social media, and media generally, seeing men on TV cooking. I think that's helping to break down those stereotypes a little bit. So I hope it changes more, but nowhere near as fast enough as I would like personally. So, but that's just a cultural thing, and I think it's it takes more than one person or one generation. It takes everybody's input to kind of accommodate those things and those changes. Again, I'm not like, some things, yes, I'm critical about. A lot of them I'm not, because that's just how it's our culture. It's part of our culture, and it's not saying that it's a bad thing per se. It's just how it's always been, and it takes time to have those shifts, and that's just natural. But obviously, some things could be a bit quicker.
Correct. I mean, I'm complete. I think not just I think all of us are completely with you. I think boys, girls, men, women, not men, not women. Everyone practically should cook. It's just not to become something. Not, I mean, I won't even say not as a life skill. It's just a good thing to do. It's just you must
fun,
know
isn't
about
it?
it. It's just fun.
Yeah,
absolutely,
it's fun.
Yeah.
All right. And now we are on to our final segment. So, in this segment, we'd like to hear from you one example of a dish that you think is underrated, one example of a dish that you think is overrated, and one absolute favorite dish of yours. Could be Bangladeshi, could be outside of that as well. Up to you.
God, I just love food so much. It's hard for me to say. Okay, one thing that I love a lot, I think biryani is like everyone's favorite. I love biryani, a good biryani.
We all love biryani.
So biryani is absolute top, alongside a Bangladeshi chicken roast. I would say those are they coexist together for me. So chicken roast is not the same as roast chicken. It's basically pan-fried chicken cooked in a masala or gravy, or mashla as we call it. And it's caramelized onions, and it's just so delicious. And you have nuts paste in there sometimes as well. And that's a traditional Bangladeshi dish. So I would say that's pulao or biryani. In terms of overrated dish, I don't know. I think there's lots of things that are overrated. And you know what? A lot of the times, seriously, I think there are. There's some people, like I don't know. I mean, underrated. I mean, okay, let me think about the overrated, but there's just too many. But underrated, I would say, would be like a simple dal, I guess. Because you can cook it so many different ways.
Yeah,
it's nourishing. It's good for you. It's just. It's tasty, you can make it as rich or as light as you want, in terms of consistency, in terms of what you put in it. So I feel like that's essential comfort food, anything with lentils and rice in it, or, khichdi as we call it, or khichdi, so yeah, dal, absolutely underrated, but overrated, I don't know. I feel like I don't know what to say now, but
You can
Okay.
you can give multiple examples if you think lots of dishes are overrated.
Yeah, so like just generally, not just South Asian food. I feel like people have you know, kind of salad. I guess I hate salad so much. Salad.
Yes.
I will not be living on leafy vegetables. They usually get ignored. Sometimes they're on my plate. Nowadays, I try. Sometimes I have to still look at them like, oh my god, I'm just so anti like food waste. If it's on my plate, I'll try and eat it, trying to hide it somehow. But I will not choose a salad. And it's just, I feel like for me, it's not food. It's, you know, yes, you have like different salads, but I feel like when people say, oh, but this is not a salad, salad can be so many different things. But that's when you have to try hard to make it a nice thing. You know, salad in itself with like simple things, it's not nice. You know, and in my opinion, I just think I'd rather, you know, not eat anything. I'd rather choose something else any day. So anyone who says, you know, and soups. Personally, I don't like salads and soups. So there was the two things that if I had to eat it, then I'd eat it. But I wouldn't choose. It's not like I'm gonna. Oh my god! I'm gonna wake up in the morning. I'm gonna have a bowl of soup. I'm gonna have a salad. I'm so excited. No. So that's those are two things in my opinion, especially salad overrated.
I agree with all three of these.
You agree with salad being overrated? Archit,
Yeah, I'm not a fan of salad. Yeah. I think there was this revolution of healthy food which taught people that eating salad is the only way to eat healthy because it has no fat and it has no meat. But there are lots of like regional South Asian ways to eat healthy which do not include salads.
Exactly. And you know, the thing is about, you know, again, you're saying healthy eating, this whole thing. Generally, food is not unhealthy. It's how you cook it, how you eat it, how much you eat it, and when you eat it. So all this, it's just marketing tactics, and you know, there's a fad. Everything's just a fad, and I just like suddenly there's a healthy dish. Suddenly there is, you know, like vegan, a lot of vegan food. I went to judge a food thing recently, and I happened to choose not by choice vegan and vegetarian section. Vegetarian food I do love, but not vegan, definitely not. But they a lot of foods are naturally vegan. But I mean by vegan I mean the things that are made to be vegan. That are kind of a vegan sausage, for instance.
Yeah, forcefully vegan.
And I'm like, once I remember I had this vegan chicken. I'm like, never again in my life, you know, just like, what is this? And why can't you just eat a vegetarian dish? You know, why can't there's so many things in South Asia? And even if you're not, even like in the UK, you know, obviously there's not so much like a British cuisine, even though people say there is, but there's always, I find that the British cuisine in itself is quite small, and there's so many delicious things in British cuisine that I love. In particular, baking is my number one thing. But in terms of overall, you know, fish and chips, and you have roast, and there are like certain elements which are really nice, but on the whole, I feel like there's a lot more modern British cooking has a lot more kind of influences from other areas. Whereas, you know, I think I'm definitely biased on this, but South Asian cuisine, it stands on its own. Like, it doesn't really need that much of an influence from anywhere else in order to call it, you know, like this is South Asian, this is Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Indian food. So yeah, anybody in the UK listening will think, oh god, you know, British friends, you know, but it's true because, you know, a lot of our national dish, I think still is, you know, chicken tikka masala, even though that's not really a dish, you know what I mean? Because people love other things. So yeah, I mean, that's salads overrated, and I don't know. Yeah, I mean, in terms of other cuisines, I don't know. Some things again can be very simple, but it can be very satisfying. Like I had chips and beans the other day and a fried egg, and everybody loves fried eggs, you know. And that can be really simple, but comfort food and underrated. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. What are your overrated? And I'd love to hear your guys. You know,
we keep doing this, and depends on the ingredient that we pick. We have underrated over it, but in general, what would be an underrated food, Archit?
For me, I would choose fried eggs. I think fried eggs are fantastic, simple to cook, very tasty. You can customize them based on whatever vegetable you want to add to them. If you want to add cheese, you can add cheese to them. You can add soy sauce to them. You can add soy sauce. So yeah, I think fried eggs are underrated. And overrated, you know the answer, which is vada pav. I think vada pav is very overrated.
You know, no. I've never had a vada pav in my life, I don't think.
Good. You're not missing out.
You're missing out on such a lot of fun. Just saying, it's the most amazing desi burger.
Sadaf, what would you call your underrated, overrated? Overall.
I will go with Dina when she talked about dal. I think dals are quite. I mean, for me, it's a regular weekly thing. So once in a week, I have to, and I'm not about chawal and dal. So that's a daily thing. That's an afternoon thing. But specifically, any kind of dal with roti. That's my thing. Every week, I have to have that. So I force people to cook it or myself to cook it every week. That's an underrated. Overrated. What is overrated? A lot of fusion food is very overrated.
Yes, fusion food. You know what? I don't like fusion foods. Just so
Yeah.
I just
In the name of fusion food, people just randomly mishmash stuff and they voila, you have a new thing. I'm like, no, it's not a new thing. It's just a disgusting thing.
Chicken tikka hot dog.
Chicken tikka hot dog, correct. So I don't understand. Yeah,
literally, don't they?
Just leave it. Just leave them. You don't have to like work on every single damn thing. But yeah, you can recreate those dishes. So I have no problem getting sort of recreating that. But apply some brain. It's not like, oh, you get chicken, you have chicken tikka, you just throw it in on the pizza and make it like pizza. No, I mean, for me, it's very less of thinking. So yeah.
What about your favorite dishes?
My absolute favorite is biryani. That's absolute favorite. I can keep on eating every day. Well, not every day, but yeah, every week.
Yeah.
Archit's favorite is nothing.
For me, a bunch of them actually. If I have to go out and eat, then butter chicken for sure. At home, it's eggs. I mean, eggs are something I eat every day in some form or the other. So I would have to say eggs.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. Before we wrap up, nobody has ever asked us what's our favorite and overrated.
Oh, really?
We're on it.
I know, we're not expecting it either. We're like, oh, wow. People ask us this question as well.
So what we typically do is our episodes are often based on a particular dish. For example, last week we did an entire episode on potatoes, just Sadaf and I talking about potatoes. And then we pick our underrated, overrated, and favorites within that particular scope. So we picked our favorite potato dishes, our overrated potato dishes. So typically that's what we do. But overall, we've never been asked this. So thank you for asking us.
I'm glad to find out.